They have nowhere else to go. There's maybe a chemical dependency on an opioids or something else where they can't get out of the situation that they're in. They're enslaved to the circumstances, and they feel that the only recourse they have is to sell their bodies and ostensibly give that money to another person.
I would rather you report something and it turns out to be false than not report it and it turns out to be true and we missed that opportunity to rescue a victim.
This is a crime, that really targets our most vulnerable asset, and that's our children and our youth.
I've seen guys, they will put actually barcodes, tattoos on, just mentally making that victim think that they're a piece of property that can be bought and sold.
It runs the gamut. A lot of times people might think of the chains and the shackles of someone being held, but oftentimes it's that psychological shackling, if you will, where they're in love, that they've fallen in love with an exploiter or a pimp, or they have nowhere else to go. There's maybe a chemical dependency on an opioids or something else where they can't get out of the situation that they're in.
Back then it was different. You had somewhat of your OG pimps or your old time guys that were still in the game, but it still wasn't, that guy necessarily in, that Cadillac or in that purple suit per se, but they still had a lot of flash to them, taking the photographs and different things. They were still advertising either on the street corner or on the internet. That's back when Craigslist was the big thing where they would advertise back then prior to Backpage becoming what it became.
There is the initial attraction. Oftentimes they may meet a pimp or an exploiter, and it's the idea of traveling around the world and being in a modeling career and walking around with the brand new Gucci bags and the whatever else. And I think over time they start to realize what they've gotten themselves into. And at that point can often turn to a myriad of different things to anesthetize the situation and to make it more palatable, and oftentimes alcohol or drugs and whatever they can to really get themselves through the day. There is that idea I think that a lot of people have that people are just snatched, albeit at a Great Lakes crossing or IKEA. And not to say those things can't happen, but in the 15, 16 years that I've been doing this, and even at a national scope, I've not known of a situation. When I say the vast majority, I would say pretty much all of the time, the individuals know their exploiter. They have a relationship with them or a relationship where someone has another relationship. So it's someone in the neighborhood, it's a friend, it's a family member, it's someone they're dating or falling in love with. And so that's oftentimes the grooming process and how it's initiated.
I think it's more people that these people actually trust, that they think are good people, are taking advantage of them.
I picture vulnerable, naive young people being exploited, co-opted and, exploited.
Exploitation, forced labor, control, forced prostitution.
I picture sort of an apartment house or something full of underage people. Probably a lot of them on drugs because that's how they keep them in there, and various people coming to visit, or maybe they take them out somewhere.
The people that are involved in it are not necessarily the people that you think, which is really the scariest part about it. It can be people that you think are normal, good, outstanding citizens are somehow involved in this, in this trade, if you will. So.
Me personally, there's nothing wrong with being a helicopter parent as long as you're not, smothering them too much. I think you have to find that balance. You have to be able to, one, teach and be that parent and keep them safe. But you have to give them some freedom as well so they grow and learn and can be a good member of society. So you have to find that line and you have to know your child because some kids need more watching than others.
Oftentimes, if there's a, let's say, traditional pimp, and he has what's called a stable, or he has 3 or 4 girls that are working for them, in their off time, when they're not providing sexual acts in exchange for money, they will sit in a hotel room and usually befriend people. They'll reach out to people on Facebook, Instagram, what have you, Snapchat, and they'll just develop relationships and try to identify girls that they feel like might be able to join the family. So it's pretty much everywhere, from the schools to online, developing relationships all over. Just as wherever a child is going to hang out is where a pimp is likely going to try to recruit them.
Some of that I got prior to my youngest being born. I was at a training and a victim spoke about how she was taken and kidnapped, how she had met some guy online and he lured her to a place very brave victim stood up in front of, like, I want to say it was probably 2,500 law enforcement members there at this training. And one of the questions that was asked from her, from a parent in the class, was, as a dad, what can I tell my child to try to prevent them from being a victim like you? And she answered the question honestly. It was like, you have to be truthful with your kids. They get to that age where they're a teenager and they think they know it all. But her advice to us was, be honest and open and tell the truth and don't try to sugarcoat anything. And I do that with my children.
What is the youngest victim you remember saying?
11, 12 or 11? 9, yes, right.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's, there are situations where, honestly, I've had parents that will set up dates for their young children as well. So I guess to that end, 2 or 3. So it kind of runs the gamut.
I am looking at everything. There's apps that hide other apps, so there's no specific apps you look at. Of course, you want to pay attention to anything that they can receive and send photos or text messages, so pretty much anything that they can communicate with, which is 99% of the cell phone. It's a matter of, one, building that bond or that trust with your child, and don't have a problem with doing spot checks and let me see your phone right now and see what he's doing, or go down or play video games with him myself and interact with some of his friends on there to make sure they are kids his age and not grown men acting like children.
When Lieutenant Price and I started back in, 2006, thereabouts, like I said, having a conversation with law enforcement, with our partners, even in our own organizations, was incredibly difficult. And I think it was because people didn't understand the perils associated with trafficking. And even the community misconstrued, a 15-year-old girl, like, well, she just likes to buy new things and have sex, and they didn't realize the psychological chains and the enslavement, that was really there. The Stockholm Syndrome and a myriad of different psychological pressures that are consistent. So I think understanding and really dedicating even resources has changed significantly. I think the community is behind it, law enforcement is behind it, and we see that this is a crime, that really targets our most vulnerable asset, and that's our children and our youth. And it robs them of any innocence and oftentimes of the life that they could have.
It could be all sorts of things. I mean, if it doesn't look right, I would say report it. But it could be, that female or male that's with someone, but you can just tell or see that something just doesn't seem right, like on their face, they don't seem happy. Maybe you see bruising.
I think with children, they tend to start to become very detached.
Maybe you overhear a conversation where there's threats made during that conversation.
A lot of unexplained absences in the night, on the weekends. No one's really knows where they're at.
Most people have good instincts where they can sense that something is wrong. I would say you need to, report that and let us as law enforcement conduct the investigation to make sure.
And then you start to have an increase in the number of purchases. We're walking around with, lavish gifts, nice watches, things like that. Multiple cell phones is another one.
I would rather you report something and it turns out to be false than not report it and it turns out to be true and we missed that opportunity to rescue a victim.
The longer an individual is in, they start to have a lot more physical effects, bad hygiene, bad teeth, STDs, burn marks, different things like that from being in the lifestyle over a prolonged period of time. So I think, there is no unique situation. People may see things and they're like, this just doesn't add up, and they don't necessarily report it. And I always encourage them to, reach out to the National Human Trafficking Hotline and just report what they see. Nothing may ever come of it. Law enforcement doesn't get it, but Polaris takes that information and it may just be one piece of a much larger puzzle.
There's, more room for, changes in the laws, which I know that's being worked on now. So that's looking promising. And I think even getting training out there for the civilians, so they know what to look for and where to report it as well as law enforcement. We actually, a few years ago, mandated all of our road troopers or all of our enlisted people in general to get training for how to look out for signs of human trafficking. Now getting out and awareness is getting out. We're slowly making that shift like we did for domestic violence where it's on the upswing of things getting better.
Though the small victories are great, you realize that, as soon as you take one down, there's likely 2 or 3 others that have popped up. And now things have changed and, there's been technological evolution. And so you're kind of always behind the 8 ball, if you will, and really trying to play catch up.